After we did the prototype testing, we revisited the focus areas and created some design principles. These will be in the toolkit. We think that these are universal and should be applied to any mobile money app or any DFS app. And we hope that our design embodies these principles. So I'm going to talk about an overview of the app. I'm going to demonstrate the prototype. And then I'll get into some of the individual use cases. So the first thing you'll see is the home screen. The home screen is characterized by large, detailed illustrations that visually depict the core features. The purpose of this is to place a focus on a smaller set of key actions, helping the user prioritize what they're trying to accomplish. The second thing about this is that we're keeping it static so that it's easy for users to memorize the layout of the screen and to make it more predictable every time we use this. That's not to say we don't have some dynamic features in here, and I'll get to that a bit later. But the other concept that we tested in the field with users was a lot more dynamic. It showed things like transaction history. And the preference for the users that we tested with was to keep it simple and to keep it consistent. They want to see the same thing each time they launch the app. So here's an example of one of the icons that we're using, and I'll get into this in more detail. But having detailed illustrations that represent the function. So for send money, it's two hands exchanging cash. And we tested a lot of different versions of this icon and other icons, and I'll share some examples of what worked and what didn't work and why we arrived at this set of icons. The second key feature, and probably the signature feature of this concept, is what we're calling the Smart Assistant. And this is a way to provide contextual and personalized suggestions throughout the app experience. So we want to create personalized suggestions to help the user discover new features. So remember, one of the focus areas was how do we make the other features more salient? How do we help users understand what else the app or what else the service offers beyond just sending money? And then we also use the assistant to offer quick access to transactions that we know the user is likely to make again. So in this example, on the home screen, the assistant is saying, "Good morning, Faiza." And Faiza is the name of our user in this example. Here are some suggestions based on your recent activity. And then it's listing the people that Faiza has either transacted with most recently or transacted with most frequently. The Smart Assistant is also used to provide contextual support throughout the experience. So as they go through a flow, as they go through a transaction, how can we guide them through that? And how can we give them confidence that they're making the right decisions, that they're doing things appropriately, and a place to go to get explanations when they need it? So the assistant will give explanations. So in this example, the user is in the send money flow, and they're being prompted to put in the recipient's CNIC number. They can open the assistant. The assistant's going to explain what the CNIC number is. This speaker icon below the assistant is a button that the user can press to have that text read out loud. And then also visual cues to help them really understand what is happening at this stage in the process. So in this example, there's an illustration of a national ID card pointing to what the CNIC number is to help a user really identify what needs to be entered at this stage in the process. A user accesses the assistant at any time in the experience by pulling down on the screen. And I'll demonstrate that over here with the prototype. So here, what you're looking at over on the prototype is the home screen before I've logged in. But at any time, I could swipe down on the screen and reveal the assistant with explanations about the screen that I'm currently looking at. And then I could easily hide that. So throughout the experience, this is always accessible, and it's giving me information related to the specific screen that I'm looking at. So the idea is, how can we give them help in context without interrupting their current flow? But also, how do we make this not intrusive for people who don't need it? So Alex gave the example of Clippy, who would kind of arrive on your screen even if you didn't need it. This is easy to ignore for people who don't need it, and it's there when they want it. And then swipe up to close it. So it's sort of a layer behind the main content. So someone earlier asked a question about language. When we tested our prototypes with users, we were testing them in Urdu. And it was pretty interesting and pretty surprising to us that most people said right away, why is this in Urdu? They didn't expect that. In fact, they didn't even really desire that. To a lot of the participants, the smartphone is an aspirational object. And to a certain degree, so is having an app that is in English. A lot of the participants expressed that having an app in Urdu felt backward, or they would be self-conscious if their friends knew that they were using an app in Urdu. So the solution that we arrived at was have it default to English, but give a facility for people to translate to Urdu when they need it. So don't make this a persistent setting, but make it an option to switch as needed. For example, anyone who has an Android device can set their Android settings to Urdu, which would then flip the design. It'd be right to left. None of the participants we met used that. Even if they knew about it, they chose not to use it. So to demonstrate on the prototype, I just press the Urdu button. All the text changes, but the layout's not changing. It's not flipping the design. It's not reorienting the design from right to left. It's just allowing people to have the text translated, which is ultimately all they need. I'm confused about what this word means. Let me change the language setting and see that. Okay, so we have 4 use cases that I'll walk you through today. There's some more in the toolkit, which you'll get in the coming weeks. So onboarding and first-time use, I'll show a few key elements from that. Sending and receiving, help and support, and then marketing. During our stakeholder interviews, another thing that came up from most of the providers that we met with was, how do we use a smartphone app as a channel to promote new services? So we have some ideas about that. So first we'll look at onboarding. Before I get into the reason for the decisions we made, I'm just going to walk you through it in the prototype so you get a sense of the flow, and then we'll go back and talk about some of the individual components. So the screen you're seeing now is me opening the app before I've logged into my account. I open the assistant, or potentially the assistant actually opens by default to make it more easily to discover. And now I get a series of steps that educate me about the app, but also about the service. So the first thing I'm seeing is an introduction from this assistant to familiarize the user with this feature, the fact that there is this assistant who's always available. And in the description, they're prompting me to press the next button. So I'm seeing what I need to do next. As I go through this, I get a series of steps about education for the service. So in this example, the assistant's saying, Noor uses mobile money to send and receive money without leaving her home. I have an illustration of that. I press next. Noor uses mobile money to be safe because she does not have to carry cash at the market, and is showing her making a purchase with a shopkeeper using her phone. Paying bills and loading credit. So these were 4 of the use cases that our participants valued most, and we've wanted to make sure that they fully understood these before they started using the experience. And we told it as a story to help them envision using it in their daily life. And when we switch back to this presentation, I'll talk a bit more about those decisions. And then the last step is to encourage someone to create a free account, or if they're already registered, to sign in. So as I said, we decided to tell a story. We found that telling a story was the most effective way to help people envision how they can engage with the service and become aware of the features that they might not already know about. So in this example, Noor uses mobile money to send and receive money without leaving her home. So we're telling a story about this character that our participants were able to relate to. We're showing someone doing it in their home. They're able to identify with that value. Pretty much all the women we met right away said, the best thing about this service is that I don't have to leave my house. I can do it without leaving my house. And in fact, the first design we had showed Noor outside. And as we were testing this with users, we were iterating on the fly, and we did a sketch of Noor in her house, and people were telling us, yes, that makes more sense. This makes me want to use it, because now it's really clear to me that I could do it without leaving the house. We chose to use illustrations that have a lot of detail and avoid abstraction, and show the use taking place in the context of where someone would be using this feature. So another approach we tested that failed was using more abstract, more modern kind of infographic stuff, kind of the stuff you would see in apps in the US or more sophisticated apps. But this did not resonate with people. They had difficulty deciphering what it meant, and it lacked the storytelling component. It was more just a list of benefits and features, which people understood, but they weren't able to internalize as well as they could internalize when they were seeing this story about Noor at home, going to the shop, being in the market. When someone logs into the account for the first time, they have a personalized greeting. This is another element of this concept that resonated really strongly with our users. So the assistant is saying, "Good morning, Faiza. Before you send money, you need to add balance to your wallet by visiting a shop." So a few things are happening right here. First is that they're logging into their account and they're being greeted by this assistant in a warm greeting. So they're understanding the role of this assistant feature. They're having a more personalized, trustworthy experience, which is building their confidence. In this example, they're getting a personalized suggestion about what action they could take next. So because maybe they haven't added balance to their account yet, the assistant is recommending, "Hey, why don't I help you find the nearest shop where you can go add balance to your account?"